No horse at Ravenhill had feared a storm until the Duke taught the whole estate how to tremble. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, the rain had turned the stable roof into a drum, beating hard over the black cliffs of coastal Maine, while the Atlantic roared beneath the manor like some old creature denied its rest. Grace Miller stood ankle-deep in clean straw with both hands on the leather bridle of Mercy, the tall black mare who had not accepted a rider in 6 years. Around her, the grooms kept their distance. Even old Mr. Vale, who had handled carriage teams through blizzards and funerals alike, would not step within 10 feet of that horse. Mercy's eyes rolled white whenever thunder moved over Ravenhill. Her sides shivered. Her polished hooves struck the boards once, twice, like a warning sent up from the floor. Grace did not flinch. She only lowered her voice and touched the mare's neck with the patience of someone who knew fear was never cured by command. "Easy, girl," she whispered. "No one here is asking you to be brave alone." The stable doors opened then, and the rain came in sideways, cold as needles. Every man in the building straightened. Duke Nathaniel Hawthorne crossed the threshold in a dark riding coat, his broad shoulders wet from the storm, his pale face carved into the stern stillness that had made servants lower their voices for years. He was taller than any man Grace had ever stood near, not merely in body, but in the way silence seemed to make room for him. His dark hair was damp at the temples. His gray eyes went first to the mare, then to the saddle waiting over the rail. "Have her ready," he said. "The south road will be under water before sundown." No one answered. The village below needed medicine from the manor stores before the bridge washed out, and only Mercy was fast enough to make the cliff road in time. Yet the mare had belonged to his younger brother Thomas, whose name had not been spoken inside Ravenhill without a hush since the night he rode into a storm and never returned. Grace looked from the saddle to the Duke, then to Mercy's trembling legs. The truth rose in her before caution could stop it. "Your Grace," she said, clear enough for every groom to hear, "you are too large for that stable horse." The stable died into silence. A lantern hissed in the damp air. Mr. Vale closed his eyes as if expecting dismissal to fall like an axe. Mercy tossed her head, the silver bit flashing. Nathaniel turned slowly toward Grace. She felt the weight of his title, his house, his grief, and every rule she had just broken. Still, she did not lower her gaze. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he stepped closer, close enough that the smell of rain and cold wool reached her, and his voice dropped into something quieter than anger. "Then perhaps," he said, "you should teach me how to become lighter." Grace's fingers tightened around the bridle. She had prepared herself for pride, for punishment, for the sharp cruelty rich men used when wounded in public. She had not prepared for sorrow. It stood behind his eyes like a locked room suddenly opened. Around them, the grooms stared at the floor, but Grace could not look away. The Duke's answer had stolen every word from her mouth, because it was not the reply of a man insulted by a servant girl. It was the confession of a man who had been carrying a dead brother, a silent house, and 6 years of blame across his back, and had finally heard someone say the burden was too much. The silence that followed Nathaniel Hawthorne's words lasted only a breath, yet it changed the air inside the stable as surely as if the storm had crossed the threshold and taken a seat among them. Grace Miller became aware of every sound at once: Mercy's uneven breathing, the rain striking the roof, the leather strap creaking beneath her hand, the far-off moan of the warning bell near St. Orlan's light. No one moved until the Duke looked away from her and spoke to the head groom. "Leave us." Mr. Vale hesitated. "Your Grace, the mare is unsettled, and Miss Miller has only been here 3 weeks. Nathaniel's eyes did not sharpen. They did not need to. "I said leave us." Boots shifted over straw. Men slipped past the open doors with bowed heads and careful silence, grateful to escape whatever judgment might follow. Grace remained where she stood, her palm resting against Mercy's damp neck. She should have apologized. Any sensible girl in her position would have done so quickly, softly, and with her eyes lowered. But Grace had learned long ago that apologies given to protect another person's pride often became chains around one's own throat. I meant no disrespect, she said at last. I meant the horse. A faint change passed over Nathaniel's face, too small to be called amusement, and too tired to be warmth. Most people at Ravenhill say what they do not mean and hide what they do. He turned toward Mercy. The mare's ears went flat. Her body tightened as if memory itself had touched her. Nathaniel stopped 6 feet away, and Grace saw it then. Not fear exactly. Not weakness. A man like him would have known how to bury both beneath posture and command. It was recognition. The horse remembered him, and he remembered what had happened the last time her saddle met the storm. She will not carry you today, Grace said. Not because she is stubborn. Because she is still listening for the sound that broke her. Nathaniel's hand, gloved in black leather, curled once at his side. And you know this after 3 weeks? I knew it after 3 minutes. She softened her voice, though not her meaning. Animals tell the truth before people do. Outside, thunder rolled over the cliffs, and Mercy startled against the bridle. Grace stepped with her, not pulling, not commanding, merely moving close enough to give the mare something steady to feel. Nathaniel watched the motion with the stillness of a man studying a language he had forgotten. My brother believed that horse could fly, he said. The words came without warning, low and almost unwilling. Thomas said she had the heart of a storm and the feet of an angel. Grace looked at Mercy's trembling legs. Perhaps she did. Perhaps she still does. But even angels fall silent if no one speaks gently to them afterward. His gaze moved back to her, and for one sharp instant Grace wondered whether she had gone too far again. Yet he did not dismiss her. He did not raise his voice. He only looked toward the far wall, where an old saddle hung beneath a gray cloth, untouched by dust because every servant feared it too much to clean around it. You will care for her, he said. Mercy? Yes. I already do. No. Nathaniel turned fully toward her. You will care for her as if she were the most important creature in this house. You will have whatever feed, medicine, blankets, and tools you require. If any groom interferes, he answers to me. Grace swallowed, the command settling over her like a door opening into a room she had not expected to enter. Why? Because you were the first person in 6 years to look at that horse and see something other than a curse. The warning bells sounded again through the rain, dull and distant, and at the noise Mercy shuddered so violently that the bridle slipped in Grace's hand. Nathaniel flinched. It was slight, almost hidden, but Grace saw it. He hated that she saw it. His jaw hardened at once. That bell rings when the tide rises over the lower road, he said. By morning the village may be cut off. Then let me take the medicine. No. The answer came too quickly. You asked me to care for her. Grace lifted her chin. Let me begin by proving she is not broken. Something moved in the Duke's eyes, dark as the sea below Ravenhill. And if she throws you? Then I will get up if I can. You speak as if courage is a simple thing. No, Your Grace. I speak as if fear should not be the only thing allowed to make decisions. The stable seemed to hold its breath around them. At last Nathaniel looked at Mercy, then at the storm beyond the doors, then back at the young woman with straw on her skirt and rain light in her hair. You will not ride alone, he said. I know the cliff road better than anyone living. Grace's heart gave one hard beat. With respect, Your Grace, Mercy may not accept you beside her. His answer came quietly, and somehow that made it heavier. Then we shall both learn whether your gentleness is stronger than my ghost's. By the time Grace Miller led Mercy from the stable, the rain had softened into a fine gray sheet that blurred the line between Ravenhill Manor and the sea below it. The cliffs vanished and reappeared through veils of mist. Far down the slope, the village lamps flickered like candles cupped in trembling hands, each one waiting for the medicine locked in the Duke's leather case. Grace tightened the girth with careful fingers, speaking under her breath while Mercy shifted but did not rear. Nathaniel Hawthorne stood several paces away, holding the case as if it weighed more than bottles and bandages. His riding coat had been changed for a heavier black one, and a silver-handled walking stick rested in his right hand, though Grace noticed he did not lean on it. "You do not ride?" she asked, because the question had been sitting between them since the stable. "Not Mercy." His answer came clipped, clean, and closed. "Not any horse?" The Duke looked toward the cliff road, where water ran in narrow streams over the gravel. "I said I know the road." Grace understood the correction. He would walk beside them, a man of title and command, choosing mud over saddle because some part of him still stood inside an older storm. Mr. Vale brought a lantern to the stable door, his lined face pale with worry. "Miss Miller, keep to the inside of the road. If the fog thickens, follow the stone posts. There are 13 before the bridge." "I know," Grace said. "I counted them this morning." The old groom blinked, surprised, then nodded with the smallest trace of respect. Nathaniel noticed. He seemed to notice everything, and yet Ravenhill had been blind for 6 years. They set out as the warning bell at St. Orlan's light tolled again across the water. Mercy's whole body tightened at the sound, and Grace felt the shiver pass through the reins into her wrists. "Easy," she whispered. "That is only iron and wind. It cannot chase you." Nathaniel walked on Mercy's left, far enough not to crowd her, close enough to reach for the bridle if the road turned bad. The cliff path curved away from the manor through wet pines and low black stone walls silvered by rain. Below, the Atlantic struck the rocks with a deep, steady thunder. For the first half-mile, no one spoke. Grace listened to the mare's breath, to Nathaniel's boots pressing into the mud, to the leather case tapping softly against his leg. Then he said, "You handle her as if you trust her. I handle her as if I want her to trust herself. There is a difference." "A great one." Mercy's ears moved at Grace's voice. The mare stepped around a flooded rut and kept going. "Most people ask frightened creatures to obey. My father taught me to ask them to remember they are not helpless." Nathaniel's gaze shifted to her. "Your father trained horses?" "Yes." The word was simple, but the ache beneath it was not. "For ranches, racing barns, private estates. Anywhere that would pay a fair wage, and some that would not." "Where is he now?" The rain gathered on Grace's lashes. She kept her eyes on the road. "Buried in New Hampshire, under a pine tree near a stable that was never his." Nathaniel said nothing, and because he did not offer the easy apology people gave when they wished to escape another person's grief, Grace found herself continuing. "He was blamed for an accident he did not cause. A wealthy owner needed someone small enough to carry the shame. My father was convenient." The Duke's steps slowed almost imperceptibly. "And yet you came to work for a house like mine. Horses still need care, even when people with titles do not deserve it." She realized the sharpness of the words only after they left her mouth. This time, she did glance at him. "Forgive me. Do not apologize for honesty merely because it arrived without gloves." His face remained stern, but his voice had changed, roughened by something Grace could not name. The road narrowed as they approached the old cedar bend, where the trees leaned over the path like mourners. Mercy stopped. Her nostrils flared. Ahead, through the fog, the shape of St. Orlan's light rose on its distant cliff, pale and abandoned, its warning bells swinging in the storm wind. Nathaniel went utterly still. Grace saw his hand close around the walking stick until his knuckles whitened. "This is where she refused to pass the next morning," he said. "After Thomas?" He did not answer at once. When he did, the name seemed to cost him breath. "After they brought Mercy back without him." The mare trembled, and so did the man beside her, though only one was allowed to show it. Grace stepped forward, placing herself between them and the fog. "Then we do not force her," she said. "We let her look. We let her breathe. We let her learn the road is not the same night." Nathaniel looked at Grace then, truly looked, as if this stable girl with wet skirts and steady hands had spoken not to the horse but to the locked room inside his chest. The bells sounded once more. Mercy flinched, but she did not turn back. Mercy stood at the cedar bend with reins sliding down her black neck, listening to the bell as if it were a voice rising from the past. Grace did not pull the reins. She did not murmur empty comfort. She only stood beside the mare, one hand resting near the damp mane, while the gray world narrowed around them to fog, cliff stone, and the slow breathing of a frightened animal. Nathaniel Hawthorne remained on the other side of the road, silent beneath his dark coat. Every toll of St. Orlan's bell moved through him like a memory he had never learned to set down. Grace could see it in the rigid line of his shoulders, in the way his gaze avoided the lighthouse and fixed instead on Mercy's hooves. "She is waiting for you to punish her," Grace said softly. Nathaniel's eyes lifted. "Why would I punish her?" "Because she came back." The words entered the rain and stayed there. Mercy flicked one ear toward Grace's voice. Nathaniel's face tightened, not with anger, but with the terrible effort of a man refusing to let grief speak before pride. "She did what any horse would do," he said. "She ran home. Then perhaps you should tell her that." He looked at Grace as though she had asked him to kneel in the mud before the whole county. "She is a horse." "Yes," Grace answered. "And you have let a horse carry your silence for 6 years." The bell struck again. Nathaniel turned toward Mercy. For a moment he seemed carved from the same wet stone as the cliffs. Then, slowly, he stepped forward. Mercy shuddered but did not rear. Grace kept her palm at the mare's neck, feeling the tremble beneath the skin. Nathaniel stopped close enough to touch the bridle, though his gloved hand hovered in the air. "You came home," he said at last, each word low, strained, and unfamiliar. "That was not a crime," Mercy exhaled. It was such a small sound that most men would have missed it. Grace did not. Neither did Nathaniel. Something in his expression shifted, the first crack in a sealed window. "Again," Grace whispered. His jaw flexed. "You came home," he repeated, quieter. "And I should have thanked you for it." The mare lowered her head by the smallest inch. Rain tapped against the leather case at Nathaniel's side. Grace felt the path open before them, not because the fog had cleared, but because the thing blocking it had finally been named. "Walk with her," Grace said. "Not ahead. Not behind. With her." Nathaniel obeyed. That alone made the moment strange. The Duke of Ravenhill, whose orders had emptied rooms and ended conversations, matched his step to a trembling mare and a stable girl with mud on the hem of her skirt. They passed the cedar bend together. The lighthouse loomed ahead, its pale tower rising from the cliff like a bone left by the sea. The road dipped, then narrowed, then curved toward the lower bridge where tidewater already foamed beneath the boards. They had less time than Grace had hoped. "The village is another mile," Nathaniel said. "The bridge may hold for 20 minutes. Perhaps less." Mercy sensed the urgency and quickened, but at the next toll of the bell, panic flashed through her body. Her front hoofs slipped on wet gravel. Grace moved at once, steadying the bridle, while Nathaniel caught the medicine case against his chest and stepped between the mare and the broken edge of the road. No one fell. No one cried out. But the cliff wind rushed up hard enough to steal Grace's breath. Nathaniel's hand closed around her sleeve, firm and brief, pulling her back from the wash of sliding stones. For 1 second they stood too close to danger and too close to each other, the Atlantic thundering below them, Mercy breathing hard at their shoulders. Grace looked up and saw not the stern master of Ravenhill, but a man whose fear had nothing to do with himself. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." Her voice was steady, though her heart was not. He released her sleeve immediately, as if remembering the distance the world demanded between them. Then thunder rolled over the water, deeper than before. A white curtain of rain swept across the road from the sea. The bridge ahead vanished. Nathaniel turned toward the lighthouse. Its lower door hung crooked beneath the old stone arch, 30 yards up a side path. "We cannot cross now," he said. Grace looked at the medicine case, then at the storm. "The village needs that before morning. And you will be no help to them at the bottom of a cliff." His voice was sharp, but not cruel. It was command shaped by terror. Mercy tossed her head, trembling again as the bell moved above them. Grace placed herself near the mare's cheek. "Then we wait where the wind cannot reach her," Nathaniel nodded towards St. Orlan's light. Inside. The words seemed to darken him. Grace understood why when she saw his eyes lift to the tower. This was not shelter to him. It was the place where the past had learned to echo. Still, he led the way up the narrow path, one hand on the lantern, the other holding the medicine case. Grace followed with Mercy, speaking softly against the storm. The lighthouse door groaned open. Cold stone, old salt, and years of abandonment breathed out to meet them. Nathaniel stepped across the threshold first, and for the first time since Grace had met him, the Duke looked less like the master of Ravenhill than a man entering the room where his heart had once been left behind. The inside of St. Orlan's light was colder than the storm outside, as if the tower had been storing winter in its stones for 6 silent years. Grace led Mercy beneath the low arch and into the circular chamber at the base of the lighthouse, where old ropes hung from iron hooks and salt-stained crates lined the walls. Nathaniel set the lantern on a wooden table scarred by time, and its small flame revealed a narrow stair curling upward into darkness. The bell above them moved with the wind, slow and heavy, each toll descending through the tower like a footstep from the past. Mercy trembled at the sound, but Grace stayed beside her, rubbing the mare's neck with a folded cloth taken from her pocket. "It is only noise," she whispered. "It cannot hurt you here." Nathaniel stood near the door, rain dripping from the edge of his coat. He had not removed his gloves. He had not set down the medicine case. His eyes were fixed on a place near the stairs where the lantern light did not quite reach. Grace knew better than to ask too quickly. Some pain, like a frightened horse, would bolt if approached head-on. She found an old blanket in one of the crates, shook the dust from it, and draped it over Mercy's back. Then she knelt to check the mare's legs, her fingers careful, her breathing even. "She is not injured," Grace said. "Only shaken." Nathaniel gave a short nod. "Good." The words sounded less like relief than permission to keep standing. Grace rose and looked toward the narrow window. Beyond the glass, the bridge was gone behind rain and spray. "We may be here for a while. Until the tide turns or the road clears." "And the village?" "There is an inland path, 3 miles longer. If the storm breaks before dawn, I will take it on foot." Grace turned to him. "You would walk 6 miles through cliff mud in this weather? A child needs medicine." He said it simply, without ornament, and for the first time Grace saw the part of him Ravenhill had hidden beneath its mourning, not a cold man, but a dutiful one so tired of failing the dead that he could not bear to fail the living. The bell tolled again. Nathaniel's hand tightened on the case. Grace stepped toward the table and lowered her voice. "Your Grace, you do not have to stand guard against a memory." His face hardened at once. "Do not make poetry out of what you do not understand. Then help me understand it plainly." He looked at her then, and the lantern flame trembled between them. For a moment she thought he would send her to the far side of the room with a command sharp enough to remind them both who he was. Instead, he looked up the staircase. "Thomas came here that night." Grace waited. The rain pressed against the tower. "We had argued," Nathaniel continued. "He was 23 and determined to prove he was not merely my younger brother. He wanted to sell part of Ravenhill's northern land to cover debts I did not know he had made. I refused. I called him reckless. I told him he treated responsibility like a costume worn for admiration. His mouth tightened. He said I wore grief before I had earned it. I said if he wished to be a man, he should ride into the storm and come back with proof." The bell moved above them, and this time Nathaniel closed his eyes. He took Mercy. By morning, the whole house knew he had not returned. Grace did not move. There was no comfort large enough for such a confession, and she would not insult him with something small. "You think your sentence sent him?" "I know it did." "No," Grace said, quiet but firm. His eyes opened. "No? A cruel sentence can wound the living, but it cannot command the dead." Nathaniel stared at her as if the words had crossed a locked threshold without permission. "You speak boldly for someone who knows so little of my brother. I know horses. I know storms. I know guilt when it is being asked to do the work of truth. The lantern made gold edges along her damp hair and the sleeves of her plain working dress. She looked nothing like the women whose portraits lined Ravenhill's halls, yet in that cold tower she seemed steadier than any marble ancestor. Nathaniel set the medicine case on the table at last. It landed softly, but the sound carried. If guilt is not truth, he said, then what is? Grace looked toward Mercy, who had lowered her head beneath the blanket and was breathing more calmly now. Sometimes it is only love with nowhere to go. The words changed the room. Nathaniel turned away, but not before Grace saw his expression break into something raw and human. Above them, the bell tolled again, and this time Mercy did not shudder. Only the Duke did. The storm did not break before nightfall. It folded itself around St. Orlan's light until the tower seemed less like a shelter than a single candle trapped inside a black glass globe. Grace kept Mercy warm beneath the old blanket, speaking to her whenever the bell turned in the wind, while Nathaniel sat on a crate near the table with the medicine case beside him and his gloved hands resting motionless on his knees. He had become quiet after his confession, not cold as before, but emptied, as if the words had taken more strength from him than the road. Grace understood that silence. Her father had carried one like it after the accident in New Hampshire, when the owner of a chestnut gelding had blamed him for a broken gate latch that every stable hand knew had been rusted for years. Grace had been 16 then, old enough to know the truth and powerless enough to watch it buried beneath money, polished boots, and signatures. By spring, her father's name had become a warning no respectable barn wished to hire. By winter, he was gone, and Grace had learned that injustice did not always shout. Sometimes it entered a room with clean gloves and asked everyone to behave properly. "You are thinking of him," Nathaniel said. Grace looked up. The lantern threw shadows across his face, softening nothing, revealing more. "My father?" "Yes." She smoothed Mercy's blanket. "I try not to when I am working." "And when you are not working?" "Then I remember everything." Nathaniel lowered his gaze. "Was his name cleared?" Grace gave a small, humorless breath. "Men like my father do not get cleared. They get forgotten." The people who knew the truth shook their heads, said it was a shame, and found safer things to discuss. The tower filled again with the sound of rain. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, but he did not offer pity. That, more than anything, kept Grace from looking away. "What was his name?" he asked. The question was simple. It struck harder than comfort. "Samuel Miller." Nathaniel repeated it once quietly, as if giving the name a place in the room. "Samuel Miller." Grace's fingers stilled. For a moment she felt the old ache rise behind her ribs, sharp but clean. No master had ever asked. No lady had ever cared. Her father had been spoken of as the trainer, the blamed man, the unfortunate case. Not Samuel. "Thank you," she said before she could stop herself. Nathaniel looked at her then, and something passed between them that had nothing improper in it, yet felt more dangerous than a touch. Recognition. Two lives standing on opposite sides of rank, bound by the same knowledge that grief becomes heavier when no one will name the dead. The bell tolled again, and Mercy lifted her head but did not tremble. Grace smiled faintly. "She is learning." "So it seems. Perhaps you are, too." Nathaniel's eyes narrowed, though without true offense. "You have a habit of speaking to me as if I were one of your horses." "No, Your Grace. Horses are easier. They do not pretend not to be afraid." For the first time, the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. Then a noise rose beneath the storm, faint at first, then clearer, a wooden knock from outside the lower door. Grace turned sharply. Nathaniel rose at once, taking the lantern. When he opened the door, wind rushed in with a spray of rain, and Mr. Vale stumbled across the threshold, soaked through, clutching his cap to his chest. "Your Grace?" the old groom gasped. "Forgive me. I came by the upper path. The manor sent word. Mrs. Alden says Miss Miller must return at once." Grace felt the warmth leave her face. Why? Mr. Vale would not meet her eyes. There is talk, miss. Nathaniel's voice cooled. What talk? The old man swallowed. That it was improper for her to be here with you after dark. That she led you off the road on purpose. Mrs. Alden has gathered the senior staff in the great hall. The words settled like frost. Grace stepped back from Mercy, shame rising hot despite her innocence, because the world had always known how to stain a poor girl faster than it could hear her answer. Nathaniel stood utterly still, and the old hardness returned to his face, but now Grace understood it better. It was not indifference. It was a blade being drawn inside its sheath. The bridge? He asked. Still flooded, your Grace, but the upper path can be walked. Nathaniel closed the medicine case, then handed it to Mr. Vale. Take this to the village by the ridge trail. You know the way. But your Grace, the manor, the child first. Mr. Vale bowed and vanished back into the rain with the case held beneath his coat. Grace reached for Mercy's bridle. I will return to Ravenhill and give notice. I will not be the cause of scandal in your house. Nathaniel looked at her, his eyes dark beneath the lantern light. You will do no such thing. You cannot command gossip to become truth or silence. No, he said. But I can make it stand before me and prove itself. Grace did not remember the walk back to Ravenhill as a road so much as a judgment. The upper path climbed away from St. Orlan's light through black spruce and rain-silvered stone, with Mercy moving carefully between her and Nathaniel, no longer fighting the bell that faded behind them. The storm had gentled, but the air remained bitter, and every window of the manor burned with light when they reached the crest, as if the house itself had been awakened to witness her disgrace. Grace kept her chin lifted. She had done nothing wrong. Yet innocence had never been a shield for girls with worn gloves and no family name to defend them. Nathaniel said little as they crossed the courtyard, but his silence had changed. It no longer withdrew from the world. It gathered force. Inside the great hall, the senior staff stood beneath the portraits of dead hawthorns, their faces arranged in careful concern. Mrs. Alden waited at the foot of the staircase in a black gown buttoned to the throat, her silver hair smooth, her hands folded as if she were attending church rather than arranging a ruin. Your Grace, she said, bowing with perfect respect. We are relieved you have returned safely. Her eyes moved to Grace, and the relief vanished into something colder. Though I fear the circumstances have placed the household in a most unfortunate position. Grace felt Mercy's reins damp in her hand. The mare had been brought just inside the entrance to be dried, but at Mrs. Alden's voice, her ears pinned back. Nathaniel noticed. Speak plainly, he said. Mrs. Alden lowered her lashes. A young stable girl alone with the master of the house after dark, in the old lighthouse, while the entire county knows its history. People will talk. Ravenhill has endured enough sorrow without inviting scandal. Inviting, Nathaniel repeated. The word landed softly and dangerously. Do you accuse Miss Miller of something? I accuse her of ambition, Your Grace. Nothing more. A murmur passed through the staff. Grace's face burned, but she forced herself not to step back. Mrs. Alden continued, gentle as falling ash. Girls who come from nothing often mistake kindness for opportunity. It would be merciful to dismiss her quietly before the village invents a harsher tale. Nathaniel looked at Grace then, and for one awful heartbeat she feared he would choose the easy path every powerful man before him had chosen, protect the house, sacrifice the girl, call it necessity. Instead, he removed his wet gloves one finger at a time and laid them on the table beside the hall lamp. You seem well prepared for a rumor born less than an hour ago. Mrs. Alden's expression did not change, but Mercy shifted behind Grace, restless. Nathaniel turned toward the mare. She dislikes your voice. The horse is nervous from the storm. No, Grace said before she could stop herself. Every eye turned. Mrs. Alden's mouth tightened. Grace stepped closer to Mercy, feeling the mare's pulse through the rain. She was calm at the lighthouse. She was calm on the road. She heard Mrs. Alden speak, and she remembered something. The hall went still. Nathaniel's gaze sharpened. What would she remember? Grace looked at the old woman's folded hands. Too smooth. Too steady. Someone who handled her before the night Thomas died. Mrs. Alden gave a small laugh. This is absurd. But Nathaniel was already moving. He crossed to the locked cabinet beneath the staircase, where Thomas Hawthorne's writing things had been kept untouched behind glass. The key, he said. Mrs. Alden paled. Your Grace, those belongings have not been disturbed since the funeral. The key. This time the command left no room for dignity. Slowly, Mrs. Alden drew a brass key from the ring at her waist. Nathaniel opened the cabinet. Inside lay an old saddle, a folded rain cloak, and a bridle wrapped in cloth. Grace stepped forward as he unwrapped it. The leather smelled of age and salt. At first glance, it seemed whole. Then Grace saw it, a narrow line near the cheek piece, cut cleanly halfway through and darkened with oil to disguise the damage. Not torn by weather. Not worn by use. Prepared. Hidden. Waiting to fail under strain. That was no accident, Grace whispered. Nathaniel's face had gone white with a stillness more frightening than rage. Mrs. Alden took one step back. Leather decays, Your Grace. Any stable girl would know that. My father taught me leather, Grace said, her voice steady now. And decay does not cut in a straight line. Nathaniel lifted the bridle into the lamplight, and the truth gleamed there, small and merciless. 6 years of guilt. 6 years of silence. 6 years of a horse blamed for carrying home what people had hidden. The Duke turned toward Mrs. Alden, and for the first time Ravenhill's great hall seemed too small for him. Bring me Thomas's room key, he said. Now. Nathaniel did not send for Thomas's room key a second time. He held out his hand, and the silence in the great hall became so deep that even the rain against the windows seemed to lower its voice. Mrs. Alden stood beneath the staircase with her black dress gathered in one fist, her composed face drained of its careful warmth. For 6 years she had ruled Ravenhill's rooms with quiet authority, arranging grief as if it were furniture, deciding which doors stayed locked, which names were spoken, which truths were left to rot behind polished brass. Now the Duke looked at her, and every servant understood that the house had changed masters in a way no inheritance could explain. Slowly, Mrs. Alden removed a smaller iron key from beneath the lace at her wrist. Your Grace, she said, I kept it only because you ordered the room undisturbed. Nathaniel took the key. I ordered it closed. I did not order it buried. He turned toward Grace. Come! The words startled every face in the hall. Grace hesitated, Mercy's reins still in her hand. A stable girl was not invited into a dead son's chamber. A stable girl was not asked to stand beside a duke while family secrets were opened. Yet Nathaniel did not look away from her. You saw the bridal, he said. You may see what I have refused to see. He led the way up the broad staircase, past portraits whose painted eyes appeared sterner in the lamplight. Grace followed with her wet skirt brushing the carpet, aware of whispers rising behind her and dying just as quickly. At the east corridor, Nathaniel stopped before a white door with a brass plate so clean it must have been polished daily despite never being opened. Thomas Hawthorne. His hand paused at the lock. Grace saw the tremor in his fingers. He saw that she saw it, and this time he did not hide. The key turned. The room breathed out dust, cedar, and lavender. Everything inside had been preserved with painful devotion. Riding boots near the hearth, a navy coat over a chair, books stacked beside a bed that had not been slept in for 6 years. Nathaniel entered as if crossing thin ice. Grace stayed near the threshold until he nodded. On the desk, beneath a silver paperweight shaped like a horse, lay a ledger. Grace opened it carefully. The pages showed stable expenses, grain deliveries, tack repairs, and payments signed by Thomas in a restless hand. Then she saw the repeated initials E.A. Not estate accounts. Mrs. Evelyn Alden. Beside the initials were amounts too large for household linen, too frequent for wages, hidden under false entries for feed and coastal repairs. Nathaniel read over her shoulder, his face growing colder with every line. She was taking from the estate, he said. Grace turned another page. A folded note slipped free. The ink had faded, but the words remained clear enough. Mrs. Alden, I know what has been removed. I will speak to Nathaniel after the storm. Return the money before sunrise, and I will spare you public disgrace. It was signed Thomas. No ornament. No anger. Only warning. Nathaniel closed his eyes. Grace felt the room tilt beneath the weight of it. Thomas had not ridden into the storm to prove himself. He had ridden toward the lighthouse to meet someone, or to stop someone, or perhaps to retrieve proof before confronting his brother. The foolish boy in Nathaniel's memory had been trying to protect the house that remembered him as reckless. A sound came from the doorway. Mrs. Alden stood there, breathing hard, her mask finally cracked. He would have ruined everything, she whispered. After all I gave this family. After all I managed while you drowned this house in mourning. Nathaniel turned slowly. You damaged the bridle. I frightened the horse, she said, her voice breaking into bitterness. That was all. I thought he would turn back. I thought the storm would humble him. Grace stepped forward, her voice quiet as falling snow. And when Mercy came home alone, you let the horse carry your guilt. Mrs. Alden's eyes flashed. You are a dirty-handed girl who does not know her place. Nathaniel moved between them, not violently, not loudly, but with such final authority that Mrs. Alden stepped back. Her hands found the truth, he said. Yours hid it. By midnight the sheriff from the village had been brought by the ridge trail, the medicine delivered safely with him, and Mrs. Alden's confession written before witnesses in the library where Thomas had once studied maps of the coast. In the great hall, before every servant who had doubted Grace, Nathaniel placed the cut bridle on the long oak table. My brother's name will be cleared, he said. Mercy will no longer be called cursed. And Miss Grace Miller will remain at Ravenhill as head of the stables, with full authority over every horse, groom, and account. Grace stood very still. She had expected dismissal, perhaps pity, perhaps a quiet coin to send her away. She had not expected honor. Nathaniel looked at her across the lamplit hall, and his voice softened only enough for her to hear the difference. Ravenhill has been silent long enough. Spring came to Ravenhill slowly, as if even the earth had to be persuaded that winter was truly finished. Snow withdrew first from the cliff road, then from the stone walls, then from the stable roof, leaving behind dark shingles, wet grass, and the clean scent of salt moving up from the Atlantic. 3 weeks after the night at St. Orlan's Light, the manor no longer seemed to hold its breath. Curtains were opened in rooms that had known only shadow. Thomas Hawthorne's portrait was uncovered in the East Gallery, not with mourning ribbons, but with a small brass lamp beneath it that burned each evening until dawn. Mercy's stall was no longer avoided. Grooms passed it without crossing themselves, and sometimes the black mare leaned over the half-door to nose at their sleeves, solemn and proud, as if she had always known the truth would find its way back. Grace Miller rose before sunrise each morning, not as the girl no one expected to last a month, but as the head of Ravenhill stables. The accounts were clean now. The tack room smelled of oiled leather and cedar. Every bridle had been inspected, every saddle repaired, every horse handled with the quiet respect her father had taught her. On the third Sunday after the storm, she found Nathaniel standing outside Mercy's stall with his riding gloves in one hand. He wore no morning black that morning, only a dark blue coat that made his gray eyes seem less like iron and more like weather clearing over water. For a long while he did not speak. Mercy watched him. Grace watched them both. She is ready, Grace said. Nathaniel looked at the mare's saddle, then at the open stable doors where pale sunlight stretched across the yard. And if I am not? Grace stepped beside Mercy and smoothed the mane beneath the bridle. Then you stand here until you are. No horse should carry a man who is pretending. A faint breath escaped him, nearly a laugh, though too quiet to become one. You have made honesty a severe discipline, Miss Miller. Only for those who have avoided it too long, Your Grace. The title no longer sounded like a wall between them. It had become something gentler, a formality with the door left open. Nathaniel approached Mercy slowly, one hand extended. The mare lifted her head, then lowered it until his gloved fingers touched the white mark between her eyes. Grace saw the movement pass through him, the old grief rising, then settling, not gone, but no longer ruling him. He placed his foot in the stirrup and mounted with care. Mercy shifted beneath his weight, testing him, remembering him. Nathaniel did not grip the reins too tightly. He breathed once. Then again. Grace adjusted the strap near his boot and looked up. The horse can carry you now, Your Grace. He looked down at her, and the morning seemed to still around them, the gulls over the cliff, the grooms pretending not to stare, the wind moving softly through the stable yard. His voice, when it came, was low enough that only she could hear. No, Miss Miller. She can carry my body. But you were the one who made my soul lighter. Grace's hand stilled against the leather. Words left her, as they had in the stable on the first day, but this silence was different. It held no shame, no fear, no distance sharpened by rank. It held the strange, trembling knowledge that one life may enter another quietly and change the weight of everything. Nathaniel did not ask for an answer. Perhaps he already knew that some truths needed time to become speech. He only offered his hand. Not to pull her behind him. Not to place her beneath him. To invite her beside him. Grace took the lead rope and walked Mercy into the yard, where the path towards St. Orlan's light shone in the thin gold of morning. At the gate, Nathaniel turned in the saddle and looked back at Ravenhill Manor, its windows bright, its stones no longer seeming so cold. Then he looked at Grace. Shall we? She nodded, and together they moved toward the cliff road, not as master and servant, not yet as anything the world would know how to name, but as two wounded souls who had learned that the heaviest burdens are not lifted by strength alone. Sometimes they are lifted by truth. Sometimes by mercy. And sometimes by one honest heart brave enough to stand beside another in the storm.